Last time we had seen the army as well as the administration of Shivaji. Today we shall see the revenue administration that marks Shivaji as a king different from a plunderer. Shivaji's revenue administration was largely based on the system of Malik Ambar. It was a system in which there was measurement of land as well as the assessment based on the revenue. But the problem was that there were Deshmukhs and Zamidars who were very powerful, and they have become powerful because of the neglect of the administration of Bijapur. They have installed their own castles. They have employed footmen and musketmen. They do not want to pay revenue. Even they fight with the revenue officials. One of the contemporary witnesses said that these Deshmukhs and Zamidars, they had seized the country. So therefore, before doing any substantial work on the revenue, it was necessary for Shivaji to control these people. First of all, he demolished their forts and the castles. Then he abolished the ijara or the firming system of the revenue. Thirdly, he determined the salaries of the village officials, district officials and other officials as well. This was done on a basis of a fixed salary and not on the basis of percentage. So therefore an order gradually came that things were not happening in the earlier way of anarchy. The things should happen on a different level altogether. Shivaji's revenue administration was largely successful in the sense that he always made a linkage with the headman of the village and through the headman of the village with the peasants. So this was a different system than that of even of Malik Ambar or that of Bijapur. Now in this, his land revenue demand was 2/5 of the produce. But this land revenue demand was supplemented by, according to some historians, cesses and taxes. But the contemporary evidence does not tell us of the cesses and taxes taken by Shivaji. These were more or less applicable to the days of the Peshwa after the death of Shivaji. It was stated also that Shivaji cancelled the Jagirdari system. That was also not totally correct. After the death of Afzal Khan, Shivaji allotted some Jaigirs. After the Karnataka expedition, Shivaji allotted some Jaigirs to the natural son of Shahuji. Even the goddess Bhavani had certain revenue mahals or areas earmarked for the temple. Only Shivaji did not want Inam Jaigir or Jaigir without any tax, etc. This was the old Mughal system that he discarded. So therefore the system of revenue of Shivaji was conducive to cultivation, and as a result the revenue increased, there was no pressure on the peasants and they were happy. One of the foreign travelers, an English traveler, John Fryer of the late 17th century, stated that the revenue demand of Shivaji was very heavy. It was double than those of the former days. There is no contemporary evidence to show this. The demand was heavy, certainly, but it was certainly not double of those of the former days. Shivaji was a skilled general. He was a practical diplomat, a very shrewd diplomat, and also an idealist. The beauty of the Shivaji's administration lies in the fusion of the ideal and the practical. Shivaji took, for example, Muslims, particularly Afghans, as well as other Muslims in the army. Although the Mughals had their Rajputs, but the Mughals continuously harped on the Hindus should be avoided and so on and so forth, particularly during the time of Aurangzeb. But in case of Shivaji, there was the talk of Hindu Padshaahi, but it was not a Hindu state in that sense. Only the commanders were all from Maharashtra. After the death of Shivaji in 1680, his son Shambhuji became king. Shambhuji was far more occupied with the Abyssinians of Zinjira and the Portuguese of Bassein. Aurangzeb thought that time had come to encroach into the Maratha territory deeply, and he increased the pressure. Shambhuji was captured 1689 along with his family. He was paraded in front of Aurangzeb and he was executed. His family, particularly his infant son Shahu, his family was taken into the Mughal harem, but it must be noted that Aurangzeb did not try to convert them into Muslims. They remained Hindu, they remained Marathis. Later on, Shahu married two Marathi girls while he was in the Mughal harem. The execution of Shambhuji was one of the major mistakes of Aurangzeb for two reasons. One, it spoiled the chance of any compromise with the Marathas. Secondly, it roused the Marathas into further action. Instead of being depressed, the Marathas revived their activities in full swing. After the death of Shambhuji, his younger brother Rajaram was crowned. Rajaram was a very shrewd person, and he continued the raids. As a matter of fact, he could recover most of the forts taken by the Mughals, including Rajgarh and Panhala. But Aurangzeb did not relent. He sent one of their greatest generals, Zulfikar Khan. With the coming of Zulfikar Khan, Rajaram escaped from Maharashtra, went to the eastern coast in a fort called Jinji, and stayed there and continued the campaign. Zulfikar pursued him, went to Jinji, besieged but could not take the fort. So the stalemate continued, and while the stalemate was continuing, the Marathas continued their plunder of the Mughal territories of Karnataka. They even went up to Gujarat, and the position of the Mughals was not too happy. Aurangzeb now tried all his means, but it was a movement in which the Maratha Sardars played their individual roles, autonomous, without any guidance from any central authority. It was a guerrilla warfare in which the Maratha Sardars, autonomous by themselves, they made their own decisions and they continued the plunder. Rajaram was not too happy at Jinji either. Zulfikar Khan finally got the fort, but Rajaram escaped to the fort of Satara in Maharashtra. From there and also from earlier, Rajaram sent peace proposals to Aurangzeb twice, in 1695 and 1698. But Aurangzeb on both occasions refused to accept it. 1700, Rajaram died. He was succeeded by his widow, Tarabai, who immediately offered a peace proposal. And the peace proposals, which we have in details, showed that Tarabai and the Marathas were willing to climb down, willing to reduce their claims. One of the reasons was that the state of Maharashtra was nearly devastated by continuous warfare. Tarabai's demands may be summarized in two. The first is that her son Shivaji II should be made the king of Maharashtra. And second, with a mansab and etc. The mansab should be 7,000, 7,000. 7,000 Jat, 7,000 Sawar. That is, Shivaji II was willing to work under the Mughal emperor. The second demand was that the Sardeshmukhi, as head of the Deshmukhs, should be given to the king Shivaji II. Here we note that she has dropped the claim of Chaut, which was the basic claim of the Marathas since the days of Shivaji. And she was not asking for regional independence. On the other hand, she was asking to be a Mansabdar of the Mughals. Aurangzeb at first accepted it. The Maratha Sardars also accepted it. And it was only a question of time that this peace will come. But Aurangzeb decided to change his opinion at the last moment. And as we shall see, that the Mughal emperors in later years also did the same. Now, one of the reasons of Aurangzeb's change of mind was that he thought that Shahu should be, the son of Shambhuji, should be made king. If that is done, then there would be a conflict between Tarabai and Shahu. So therefore, he did not accept Tarabai's demands and refused. Aurangzeb died broken-hearted in the city of Aurangabad in 1707. For last 10 years, he had taken his weary and ailing body throughout Maharashtra, raiding fort after forts, but finally achieving nothing. After the death of Aurangzeb, a new situation comes for the Marathas. For this, we would have to see a little bit of the Maratha polity. In the Maratha polity, there were two movements, often contradicting each other and often running parallel or often even mixed with each other. One was the socio-religious reforms, started long before Shivaji. and it continued at a diminishing rate after the death of Shivaji. The other one was the claim for regional independence, the Swarajya of Shivaji. In this claim, the Maratha Sardars played the most important role because they were the ones who made the raids, who plundered the areas, who defended the cities and the forts from the Mughal attacks and so on. These Maratha Sardars, although very brave and autonomous, plundering the areas and defending the state, they did not care for socio-religious reforms. They were not interested also of the welfare of the peasantry. So therefore, there was a contradiction, almost two parallel movements going between socio-religious reforms and the fight for regional independence. Sometimes they met, and it was Shivaji who fused the two. But after Shivaji, the problem came up, and the Maratha Sardars by that time, by 1701 or 1708, became more or less independent of anybody in the Maratha state. Aurangzeb died in 1707, and after his death, the Mughal court released Shahu, who came back to Maharashtra, welcomed by the Maratha Sardars. But the Maratha Sardars did not want to lose their autonomy. So they played very skillfully between Tarabai and Shahu, the two claimants to the throne of Maharashtra. It was in this condition that Peshwa Balaji Biswanath tried to stabilize the situation, tried to stem the anarchy, and tried to limit the activities of the Maratha Sardars. In 1719, just before his death, he made a settlement in the court along with the Maratha Sardars and with King Shahu and other officials, in which he divided the areas of plunder among the Maratha Sardars. He also made the agreement, or rather made the Maratha Sardars agree that they will collect Chaut and Sardeshmukhi, but they will pay Sardeshmukhi to the King Shahu and 34% of the revenue to him. The Maratha Sardars immediately agreed for a very simple reason. They had become independent of the king himself, and the king had become totally dependent financially on the Maratha Sardars. But before much could be done, Balaji Biswanath died, and King Shahu appointed his son Bajirao as Peshwa. This created a little bit of a problem, because so far the Maratha posts were not hereditary. But now it is becoming hereditary, and therefore other Maratha officials, they were looking ambitiously for the hereditary succession. That question was not properly resolved during the lifetime either of Bajirao or later. But Bajirao, a very skillful soldier, equally skillful diplomat, had a problem. The problem was that there was a Pratinidhi named Sripath Rao. Now Sripath Rao wanted a discussion first on the Maratha policy. What would be the policy of the Marathas in an open court? This has been recorded by Shabhasad, the contemporary author, but it is quite possible that he put his own words into the mouths of both the parties. Sripath Rao first stated that the basic problem of the Marathas was to control the Siddhis of Janjira and overrun Karnataka, strengthen the finances and the army, and decide who would be the powerful person between Pratinidhi and the Peshwa in the council of the king. He also made certain other comments, like the Mughals should not be provoked too much and one should try to make Nizam very friendly towards the Marathas. Baji Rao's reply was that Siddhis of Janjira were of not much of nuisance. It was a trivial question. The Karnataka is ripe for attack. There was total anarchy and the household troops could manage that. As for the finances, Baji Rao's thesis was that unless we get money from plunder from outside, from prosperous areas, the financial position would never be strengthened. So therefore, the Marathas should straightaway occupy Gujarat, Malwa, and plunder the areas of North India. As a matter of fact, his vision was the Maratha flag will fly on the walls of Attock on the Indus. As far as Nizam was concerned, Baji Rao said that if the Marathas get Malwa, then Nizam would be surrounded, his link with the Mughal court would be cut off. So therefore, he rejected the opinion of Sripath Rao, and naturally the Maratha Sardars sided with Baji Rao because that would give them an opportunity to plunder North India, Gujarat, Malwa, apart from Karnataka. Actually, there are 2 points of note in Baji Rao's speech. One is that it was clear that he did not want to replace the Mughal emperor. He did not want to change the Mughal emperor. As a practical politician, although the Marathas speak of the Hindu Padshahi, he knew that it is impossible to put a Hindu prince on the throne of Delhi. Since that cannot be done, the best way is to get the confirmation from the emperor of the claims of the Marathas, recognition of the emperor for the Maratha claim of Chaut, Sadeshmukhi, etc. The other point was that it was in fact the prelude to the domination of the Deccan. Although the Deccan was not properly spelled out, but it is clear that Baji Rao had his intention on the Deccan, for which he wanted to first isolate Nizam and then go on. Now, once Baji Rao's proposals were accepted, it was becoming difficult for Nizam-ul-Mulk at Hyderabad. Nizam-ul-Mulk was the governor of Deccan, viceroy of Deccan from 1715 to 1717. He did not want to pay Chaut and Sardeshmukhi from the Deccan to the Marathas, and he resisted it. They were at war. But the imperial firman came in 1715 to pay Chaut and Sardeshmukhi from the Deccan to the Marathas. So he agreed to that. He did not flout the imperial firman, but he did not allow the Maratha soldiers to be stationed near Aurangabad, the capital of the Deccan. But Nizam, although remained friendly with the Marathas, and the Marathas did not really provoke him, there was the question of the position of Nizam and Marathas in the Karnataka. Who will get the Karnataka? That was the basic position. But along with that, now it was added, who will get Malwa and other places like Gujarat. Now Bajirao decided to launch invasions, launch plunder, which was necessary to liquidate his mounting debts, to liquidate the debts of the Maratha Sardars as well. It was in this situation that the Mughals decided to act. They sent a very strong army, but this strong army was composed of very heavy infantry, cavalry and artillery. While the Marathas were depending on light cavalry, almost without artillery, depending on the swift movements, and exactly bypassed the Mughals, did not come to the frontal battle, surrounded them and create all kinds of problems. As a matter of fact, that was happened in Toda Tank much later in 1734. But in 1720, 23 and in the 20s, the Marathas inflicted severe defeats on the Mughal, and the Mughals did not have any answer properly. As a matter of fact, Joy Singh of Jaipur in 1728 suggested peace proposals, but neither the Marathas nor the Mughals accepted this. It was in this situation that Nadir Shah in 1739 arrived, which we would see next day.